Nicole. Thank you for joining us today. On the other end, you'll see Alicia. And the purpose of our conversation today is about diversity and inclusion within the meetings and events industry. The powerful activism against the killing of George Floyd has sparked really important conversations about society and how we can better support and advocate for Black lives. So as this conversation continues to grow, we wanted to shed light on this matter, specifically in the industries that we work in, and candidly talk about how we can work together to improve diversity in our industry. So our goal is really to provide you with some resources that you could leverage to start taking action in your own community, businesses, and teams. So to start off, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction about myself, and then Alicia, you can go ahead and introduce yourself as well. Cool. So just a little bit about me. I am the founder of Nulink Media. We are an event management firm specializing in staffing and execution. And we mostly work with corporate clients on corporate events and brand activations.
My name is Alicia Jenelle. I'm the owner and lead event producer of Alicia Jenelle Events. We specialize in the management and logistics of corporate and social events, anywhere from incentive programs to executive offsites and everywhere in between. Nicole and I have had the pleasure of working together for the past few years, where she heads more of the staffing side and my team more of the logistics. And so we have built such a really genuine relationship through working together so closely. And that's also what caused us to have this conversation today.
So Alicia, I want to kind of open up the conversation with asking you a few questions. To start off, we've seen a lot of information come to light that was maybe kind of under the radar up until now. So to start off, have you experienced any racism within the events industry?
So, you know what, when I first looked at this question, I had to really sit down and think about it. And the reason being is because I'm Canadian. And so typically the kind of racism that a Canadian would experience is not so much in your face as what we would refer to as overt racism, which is socially unacceptable. The type of racism I've really experienced is covert racism, which is socially acceptable. So maybe a joke here or there, something just kind of under the radar. So in the events industry, I have experienced that level of racism.
So on that note, can you share any specifics or an experience that's happened to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do, I just want to preface kind of my history. So at the starting point of my career in the event industry, I didn't really see many planners that looked like me. And, you know, if I did, they didn't really, at least from my perception, receive the kind of recognition or the accolades that some of the non-Black / minority planners would receive. So because of that, early on, I made a conscious decision to start putting myself in the same rooms of these planners who were receiving the type of recognition that I was looking for. And as a result, I started to get invited to a lot of exclusive events. My clientele started to become much more diverse. And so because of that, I would then start to find myself in certain rooms where I would likely be, you know, the only Black person or the only minority person sometimes. And so with that, what I experienced was people staring, you know, in one way or another. And I can't really speak to, right? I can't really speak to the reason. Sometimes it could be intrigue, or I did feel looks like, what are you doing here? You know, kind of thing. I've had some really amazing clients who, let's say they were white and it was their wedding. And so naturally the couple's attendees are a reflection of their race. And so let's say for a white couple, 75% maybe of their attendees might be white. And so the guest I would find when they first see me, they would kind of look like, oh, you hired a Black planner kind of thing. They wouldn't actually say it, but I could just see it from their eyes. So that's the type of I would say, racism or covert racism that I would experience attending events mostly, just kind of the looks.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that was like uncomfortable
Yeah,
to feel
definitely.
at times. Yeah.
And I think I've just gotten so used to it now that when I first enter a room, I feel the energy, and then I just let it go right over my head. I'm
You
like,
use it
girl,
as your superpower.
right? I'm like, let me put my Beyonce face on and just
Yeah,
chime right
exactly.
through and just
And use
build
it to your
relationships with
advantage.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah. And let them like
totally.
see me for me and not what their perception might be of the way I look.
Of course.
I'm just going to flip the script a little bit and ask you a question. So, being a successful owner of a staffing agency, you must get, specific requests. Like, I know for me, I've asked you like, hey, I just want all women staff to be a part of this event. So have you ever experienced some level of racism when people specifically are looking for a certain look for your event?
You know what? Unfortunately, I have, but I can only recall out of the 5 years that we've been in business, I can only recall really one time that it really came to light. And we actually don't work with this client anymore since this situation, but pretty much just a long story short, they had requested staff for an activation, and they wanted to see who we were proposing to work the event beforehand, which is very normal. A lot of times we'll submit a profile of the staff that will be attending, so they know exactly who's going to be there and kind of some of their background and their expertise. Okay. So for this one, we had submitted who was available, and they actually were all people of color. So, and really, I mean, we didn't think anything of it. This is who applied for the position. This is who's available. And you know what? They're great at what they do. They're still very capable of doing the job, of course. So they kind of came back and were like, well, do you have, anybody else for this position? They look a little bit scary.
Wow.
We want more like friendly faces. And I was really confused at first because I haven't really experienced, like really myself, I haven't experienced much of this. So I had just kind of said to them like, well, no, this is who we have available for this program. And if it doesn't fit, what you're looking for, then unfortunately we can't help you.
Wow.
So that was really disappointing and eye-opening, but I have to say that we've come, and that was actually our first year in business. We've definitely come a long, we've definitely come a long way, because at one point, even before we got into business, I worked in this industry, and it was like, if you weren't pretty much like a model, or if you weren't tall and thin and white and beautiful, you weren't really getting booked for a lot of the positions, and that's just what it was. But we've come really a long way now, where clients are requesting diversity. They're not really into just having a pretty face out there anymore. They want to be more inclusive. So I do feel like, we have come a long way, but there's still so much more to be done.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And even for myself, I'm finding my clientele are becoming more and more diverse. And I totally get, like, from a planning side, especially if you're planning a personal event, the clients tend to want to hire someone that they feel like can relate and understand them. So, I get when, Black couples or businesses, Black owned businesses will reach out to me because they feel an automatic connection. But my connection, period, the connection that I want to create outside of that relation is just, hey, this is a successful planner. She's, done XXX events. She's worked with these, large brands. This is the reason why we want to hire her. And so I feel like over the past couple of years, I've also experienced much more diversity in the clients that have reached out to me as well. So definitely a change. There's a long way to go, but there's a change that
it's good to see. And I feel like we've been making like slow progress over the last few years, even just with like, beauty standards being different and showing representation on the cover of magazines and in movies and in all of these things, where it's like brands are waking up now and they realize that they have more than just one audience to appeal to, and that they need to show the diversity in order to really be accepted in this day and age. It's really not acceptable for them to just be showing one type of person in their ads, in their social media, in their events.
Yeah, absolutely. And even for myself, like just to that point of seeing ads and, you know, other people of color, Black women in the news, the media, you know, and brands, you know, wearing their natural hair, like that's also inspired me. I used to, like, for client meetings, straighten my hair, push it back, and just feel like I had to follow this typical, you know, look so that I didn't, you know, perceive myself as being too ethnic, because then there's always a conversation about my hair. It wasn't that I wasn't proud of my hair, but then it was like, oh, your hair, it's so beautiful, can I touch it? Or there's just questions, and I wanted to get past.
You want to avoid that.
Yeah, like let's avoid talking about my awesome hair. It's great, I love it, but let's get to, you know,
that's not who you are.
It's not who I am, it's part of who I am. So I can attest to that. Even me seeing it, I've gotten so much more comfortable just like letting her out and, you know, being more comfortable in my own skin. So
definitely. So I mean, so how can we work together now to make a change? And now we know there's obviously so much to be done, but we want to focus on our industry specifically. So what would you say are some steps that we can take immediately that can, you know, help the movement that's happening right now?
So the first step to walk the walk is to identify the issues at hand. And so what we need to do is just have the conversation. And with this recent riots and protests that are going on, I think that's been a catalyst to spark a lot of conversation. And that's what we need to do. We need to address the elephants in the room. For example, like I've had people come to me and ask me questions like, hey, like, should I call you African American? Are you African Canadian? Are you Black? Like, what's the appropriate term? And people genuinely have questions. So I think that more conversation will allow us to come to this place of comfortability to be able to ask these questions without it seeming to come like it's from a negative place. It's just coming, I guess I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of the times when I get these questions, it seems like it's a genuine place and you just don't understand and they want to. So to answer that question, I identify as Black and it's okay to say that. And, you know, start there because people will just become much more comfortable. Also, another thing that we were talking about before was that this industry is predominantly female run. And although that is the case, the executives in the events industry are male. A lot of the speakers that get hired are male. Why is that? Like, it doesn't equate. So what that shows me is that there is an issue that's underlying. There's subconscious issues, subconscious racism as well, and they need to be talked about and also built into the planning structure from the very beginning, you know, of your event.
So yeah, to your point, an immediate action item can be bringing up in your initial planning stages, in your strategy meetings, within your first couple of meetings with your team, having a dedicated part strictly to how are we going to make this event diverse and inclusive, and ensuring that conversation is had early on in the planning so that you're keeping that in mind from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. And then these conversations won't feel as uncomfortable. You know, you can sit down and say, okay, let's talk about accessibility. Let's talk about, you know, how we can support females. Let's talk about how we can support the Black community in this event. So that, again, it becomes habitual and it's not some uncomfortable discussion that you have to have. It's just part of the nature, and then people
it's something that's automatically put into your planning phase.
Exactly. And so after all the talking is done, then obviously action should follow, and that's what shows a true person's you know, how do I say this, their intention, right? That shows their true intention through your actions. So educate yourself. I have had a lot of questions, come my way with regards to events or just, the current climate of the world right now and my thoughts. And what I say to that is go to Google, look up how you can be better, educate yourself. If you're a person of the Black community or minority community, really take time and assess the challenges that you've had and think about how can I now, work with my allies who are now also raising their hand to say, hey, like, I want to help you. How can I also communicate with them so they understand where I'm coming from and also be looked at as a resource as well. I really think it is double-ended. There, two people have to come together to tango. So education is very key, and understanding the issues at hand.
Definitely. I totally agree with you on that, because I mean, even just thinking back to school and what we learned in school about racism and the history of it, it's like we were almost taught that this was something of the past, and that it's not existent anymore. At least that's what, like, my school, my education was on that. So the education part is so important to understand, where it comes from, but how it's also still relevant and still happening in today's society.
Absolutely. And even myself, like, again, as a Canadian, experiencing more subliminal level of racism, if you don't really sit and meditate on your experiences, you may also think, hey, there's not really racism that goes on, or it's so subtle in comparison to the States that, hey, like, what we deal with is nothing. So to your point, education is so important. We live in the information age, so there is no reason at this stage to not understand the depths of what's going on in certain communities at this point.
Right. Definitely. So, and part of this movement that's been very positive, I think, is the education that's been circulating, and it's giving everybody an opportunity. And really, now at this point, there's no excuse to not educate yourself on this topic, because there's so much information that's out there that it's readily available.
Yeah, completely, for sure. So I'm just kind of thinking here, like, another I guess action that we can kind of work together on is creating more of like an audit, audit your culture. If you're a leader, an executive, a business owner, really sit down and analyze, hey, what's the percentage of my minority employees? What's the percentage of my Black employees, my employees with accessibility issues? Really start to think about that and build that as part of your process that you review annually, quarterly, whatever the cadence may be. And again, that will, back to the conversation, continue to bring it forefront and ingrain it in your brain so that you're, again, more used to having these conversations. And then that way you'll be able to see it more,
Right. And I think especially, like, specifically with the events industry, I mean, to put together an event, you need to have a lot of vendors and suppliers. So start there. Take a look at your vendor list and see, what are the companies, who are the companies that we're working with? Are we supporting minority-owned businesses? Do we have Black businesses on our vendor list? And are we incorporating them in our events?
Yeah, absolutely. And
another point for audit, if I can share a story. So a couple of years back, I had hired a Black copywriter and web designer for our website. And she called me out. She said, and I thank her for it. I swear. She called me out and she said, your copy and your messaging says that you have a diverse roster of staff, which we do. But the photos that we had on our website at the time were not showing that. There weren't enough images to match with that. And so I was grateful that she pointed that out, because we did have, in our history of photos, a lot that we could use. And that's something that I just didn't see.
Right.
So also I feel like, don't be scared to bring that to light. If you notice something that, doesn't connect, don't be scared to say that, because something that kind of went over my head that I didn't notice, and she brought that to my attention. I was like, you know what, you're right. We have to change that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes a humble person to make that change, right? To be okay with knowing, hey, like I can improve in this, and then actually to take the step, you have to have a lot of humility to make that change. So it's good she called you out. That's another thing. See, on the other end, you have to also, like, I find sometimes I want to, in the past, I've wanted to speak up. I wanted to say certain things, but I didn't want to be classified as, you know, some of the, what's that term? Stereotype, where they say angry Black woman, you know, if I have an attitude, or if you're a woman, they may say, okay, you're a bitch, or, you know, just for saying how you feel, expressing yourself. So I was always kind of nervous about that. So it takes also work on the end of the person of color, or the, you know, whoever is trying to represent themselves and what they don't see, to also speak up and to work within themselves, to try not to be afraid to do that, because you don't know.
And it's all about the way that you, and it's all about the way that you communicate it, right? So I think that anybody receiving that information would be grateful that, hey, we got another look at this, and we have another opinion on this, and, you know, we can make the necessary changes so that we are more inclusive.
Yeah, completely. So, and I think that ties into our next point of just creating a long-term action plan. So if you truly are trying to change the culture of your business and look through the lens of a diverse structure, create an annual plan or a quarterly plan, like we talked about, whatever cadence works for you, so that there's some level of ownership, you know, and maybe have an accountability partner, whether it's other executives, other business owners, your employees, your colleagues, and so they can check you and you know, have those conversations, so that you do have a long-term action plan, and to ensure that it's just not coming off as, oh, this is trendy right now. Diversity is trendy right now, so I'm just going to jump on the bandwagon. As part of the action plan, what I see quite a bit is that clients will say, okay, let's hire a you know, a minority person or a Black person as a speaker. That is wonderful, and it's great to, again, in the visual roster, have that person represent a different culture, or, you know, a different experience wherever they're coming from. But we also need to look beyond the speaker.
Think about it like holistically with the event. What about your entertainment? Is it appealing to a diverse audience? What about your staff, or the people that are greeting your guests? Or even the branding of your event. Is it geared just to one type of audience, or, you know, is it more broad?
Okay, so I love that.
There can be a couple of ways to look at your event, so like beyond just, you know, having a minority or a Black person on your panel. Of course, that's great and that's needed. The panel discussions need to be diverse in order for the conversation to even be interesting or educational. You want to have opinions and insight from people from different backgrounds, and that's not just, you know, that's not just on their race, but about, you know, different backgrounds in education, in work experience, and maybe where they grew up. You want to have those different connections coming in to have a really dynamic panel discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Or also, like, you know, leverage the creative elements to even teach your audience about different cultures or different ethnicities, like the food, switch it up, go Mexican, you know, incorporate some jerk chicken in there, the music, incorporate different styles, down to even the decor. Usually the decor is a reflection of the brand. So look at the colors. Okay, you know, what culture does red typically represent? Or, you know, really dig deep into it and do your research and see how through the creative elements like decor, how you can bring to fruition certain colors or certain cultures. That way you can kind of slowly integrate it as part of their normal life and their experience.
Yeah.
Really what it's about is just researching, taking advantage of the resources that you have available. Go to Pinterest, go to your colleagues, ask questions, and just take extra time. I know as an event producer myself, we always get like such little time to produce like such a huge event. We'll get like a month to plan an event for 3,000 people. So
Right.
you know, it's not easy to just go out of your way even further to do these things. But as I said before, if you build this as part of your structure, your planning process, it'll become almost second nature. And also maybe, you know, build a repository of like a checklist. Hey, these are the, you know, things I need to tick off. Not like, I don't want it to seem like, okay, the checklist, like, okay, or have we covered, you know, inclusion and diversity, check, but things that will actually remind you, hey, like, let me relook at the food. Let me relook at the decor. Let me relook at the content in the PowerPoint presentations and see how we can adjust that. You know, be responsible.
Definitely, yeah. Those are all great points.
So another kind of element that we wanted to talk about was like the media outlets. So like the blogs, publications, you know, news channels. Often people in the event industry are featured on these platforms. And this, unfortunately, is one of the places where we don't see the level of diversity that should be incorporated. So, you know, I think we should call that out and talk through that. Because really, like for me, even coming up as a planner, when I, you know, 10 years ago, when I would go and say, who are the top event planners? I'm looking on the list. And if I'm lucky, there was one person of color. And if I'm even luckier, it's a Black person. So these
Right.
publications do need to make the extra effort to source businesses that are successful, that deserve to be on these lists as well.
Right. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Sometimes I find that with the publications, they may take the easy way out, as in like, okay, who are the first, you know, few people that we see online, but they kind of need to go a step beyond that and make sure that they are hitting those checkpoints and they're not just representing one type of planner.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also, I mean, the magazines, we've all seen them, the wedding magazines more specifically, that when you go through them, there's like 2% diversity. Don't quote me on that percentage, but it's that low. And so, you know, there obviously needs to be a change. We're severely underrepresented in those areas. So how can we change them? How can we work together to have these conversations with the powers that be in the media, you know, side of things, or these publications?
Maybe it's, you know, like to my point earlier about, you know, being called out in a nice way. Maybe that's what it takes. Maybe we need to raise our hand and reach out to the publications and say, hey, I've noticed that you haven't really represented many people of color in your publication. Do you plan to change that? Or like, what are some upcoming features you have? Or here's a list of really well-respected Black planners that I think that you should feature in your publication. Maybe it takes, you know, some people reaching out to them to bring that to light.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because there is a lot missing. Even like I don't even think I've ever seen in one of the very higher level, you know, high fashion magazines, an older couple. You know, a lot of our like clients in the past couple of years that have gotten married are in their 40s, and that's not really represented as much as well. So I agree. I think it's really sitting down and thinking about all the gaps and respectfully approaching
looking to fill
these
those gaps.
platforms and look to fill them. Yeah, absolutely. Same with TV as well. I mean, like I don't I can't remember off the top of my head some of the news stations that we have even here in Canada, but typically they'll have a planner come on for a holiday, or let's say there's just like some special event, and they'll show them, hey, how do you design your, you know, event table at home? And again, a lot of the times you don't really see diversity, or if you do, it's relative to that holiday, like Chinese New Year. Okay, now you're going to see, you know, someone that reflects or has experienced that because that's where they're from. So how do we, again, switch that up a little bit. And I think to your point, it's just respectfully having that conversation.
Yeah, and and not being afraid to bring that up. And again, back to our first point is addressing those right in the beginning stages, right when you're having these strategy sessions, your initial planning sessions, making sure that these points are covered.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of clients, how do you feel like we can have those conversations? Like you mentioned, you've kind of had an awkward conversation once with a client of yours, like going forward, because this is always, I find, like the sensitive thing, because it's your client, you don't want to like upset them. Like, how do you have those conversations with your clients?
That's a good question. I mean, like I had mentioned earlier, we have come a long way to the point where most of my clients specifically are aware of the importance of diversity and inclusion, and they automatically want that from the beginning. But if you do come across a client that maybe isn't as open-minded, I mean, we're in a stage right now where it's okay to just openly say, hey, I think that we should diversify this roster of staff, and here are some other great people that I think would work really well with your brand or at your event. And advocate for those people and say that, you know, these are great people to be involved, and making sure that, you know, who you're booking for your events or to represent your brand, that there is that diversity there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also on the end of the business owner, what they can work to do is try to incorporate some diversity where possible in their posts on social media, you know, on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Start to show what you want your goal to be, and the kind of clients that you also want as well. Like maybe you do want a diverse set of clients. So showing a reflection of that, of what you're even asking them to have as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's important that we're showing that on our website, on our social media, that we're showing that that there are a diverse group of people that we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And the very last thing I want to say is like just events. Like, how do you think, because a lot of the times, like again, like I said this much earlier in the call, is like I'll get invited to these like high-end events, and then I'm only seeing, you know, myself, but I don't know, like like I'm the only person of color or a very, you know, small few. We're already at the event, and now just noticing this kind of issue there. In those cases, how would you suggest kind of dealing with that?
Well, I mean, one thing comes to mind. Usually when you're invited to an event, any type of event, you're usually allowed to bring a +1, or you can ask, can I bring a +1? So a way to kind of open that door is maybe you ask for a +1 and you bring one of your Black colleagues or friends or vendors, suppliers with you, and you introduce them to that circle, so that it's not such an exclusive one type of person event. Now you've opened it up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can attest to like being that +1 and like, you know, that's how I've also started to get invited to certain events, or, you know, been introduced to certain clients because of an ally, we'll say, because that's the term that's being used now, because of an ally. So, you know, shout out to the allies, and, you know, it's
important to advocate for each other. But even, you know, and even on the flip side, if you're going to an event and it's predominantly going to be Black women in attendance, invite one of your white girlfriends to join and be in that mix, you know what I mean? Or, you know, supplier, vendor, business colleague, whoever it might be, and just kind of keep in mind that you can bring other people into your circles, even if you don't think that they're necessarily going to have
feel
a good
comfortable
time, or it's going to be, or feel comfortable, you know, just, you know, do it, make it happen.
Yeah, completely. I like how you said that though, because that's also on the flip side. Like if it's a Black focused event, then I'll think, ooh, who should I bring? Like, you know, I don't want to make that minority person, non-Black person feel uncomfortable, but why is it that that's something that's even a thought, you know? So
right. Exactly.
Yeah, it just shows that there's underlying issues there, and if we again start doing this more regularly, it won't even be a thought.
Exactly, it won't even be a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was amazing. I'm like so happy we had this conversation.
Me
I think
too, and thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I feel like it's just nice to talk about how we can work together, to work through these challenges, as business owners, as people from different races. I think it's just important to hear different sides and come together and to continue to have that kind of conversation. So I would say like the key takeaways that, I want to leave with everyone that's watched this is, number one, just have conversations. If you genuinely have a question, note it down. And when the right person, is around, or, have that conversation, Google, do your research. Education is just so important. And again, we're in the information age, so there's really no excuse to not do it. You just need to make the time. And then ultimately your actions need to follow those research that you've done, the conversations you've had. Start to implement a regular process so that it's not homework, it's not extra work you have to do. It's just part of your process, and it's so much easier. And start to look at the lens of diversity in every scope of the way. Here in this call, we focused more towards the Black community. And in addition to that, it just goes much more beyond. It goes to ageism, sexism, dealing with people with accessibility issues, just all in all, just being diverse and inclusive. So Nicole, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you all for staying tuned, and we really appreciate it. If you have any questions, drop it in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going. All right.
Bye.
Bye.